Hello, these are our condensed flipped notes review for the AP exam, and then we are on Unit 3, which is all about development, and learning will be in a separate section for us, just development. All right, so what is developmental psychology? Basically the entire lifespan, how we change physically, mentally, and behaviorally. Three major issues: the question of nature versus nurture, the question of do we develop continuously or in stages, and do our traits persist throughout life with stability, or do they change as we age? So we've talked about nature and nurture before, so just a really quick recap there. Nature is talking about genetics and DNA. Nurture is the environment, how we were raised, how we were influenced by our environment. That even includes being in the womb and being influenced by the environment, by your mother's environment there. But we know that both impact our behavior. Behavior genetics says that the best way to look at these differences is by looking at identical twins. And again, we've talked about this in previous sections. But two terms that we want to make sure we review here are the terms monozygotic. That means when they are identical, they came from a single egg and a single sperm that split, and they shared a placenta, and then they split, but they are in that same placenta, so they're identical. Fraternal twins, we've got two separate eggs, two separate sperms developing in separate placentas. So fraternal twins are pretty much the same as ordinary siblings, except they're born at the same time. So we know that identical twins are much more similar, so they're better for studying for nature and nurture. And ideally, separated twins are better because we know that if they were separated, they have the same genes. Then if they are similar, then it's an environmental thing. And if they're different, it's a nurture thing, or nature thing, sorry. Adoption studies, personality traits are more similar to their biological parents, even when they're raised away from their biological parents by adoptive parents. So adoption studies show us what is culturally or environmentally determined. Heritability is the next one. Heritability is what of our differences are due to our genes, therefore not due to their environment. So the more inherited a trait is, the less heritable it is. For example, identical twins have a low heritability rate, near 0, because they have identical DNA. So if you live near me, our differences are even more heritable because our environment is similar, meaning it's even more certain that our differences are due to genetic differences. So more on the environmental influences. It's easy to say how the environment impacts behavior. It's how you were raised, but that doesn't include just your parents. It includes your prenatal environment, experiences and brain development, peer influence, culture, and gender. So it's more than just how you were raised by your parents. Prenatal influences includes how your mother treated you while you were in the womb, and that could have affect you through maternal nutrition, but also exposure to teratogens, which are any kind of substances that can cross the placenta and affect the developing baby. We know that alcohol can have a significant impact, and we can call this fetal alcohol syndrome, where a mother consumes more than minimal levels. So it takes a pretty significant amount. But we also know that fathers who drink during the 3 months before conception are also likely to have babies that have heart problems. So it's not all on mom. Small head, smaller eye openings, thinner lips. Those are just some of the physical abnormalities that you would see in their face. Experience helps develop brain's neural connections. So we know that a more enriched environment helps with brain development. The selection effect says that kids tend to choose friends who are similar to themselves. Parents influence our ideas on sense of education, discipline, responsibility, orderliness, charitableness, ways of interacting. So we do have peer influence, but a lot of times our parent influence still sticks with us very strongly. How do we study children? We look at longitudinal and cross-sectional studies. Remember, a longitudinal study, you're studying kids over the same group of people over a long period of time, and then you check in on them periodically. Cross-sectional, you're using groups of participants of differing ages at a single point in time, and you just check where they are right there. Cross-sectional are easier, quicker, and cheaper, but they have lots of more extraneous variables because you have lots more people involved. We talked about the Harvard Happiness Study, which was over 75 years in the making. That's one of the examples of one of the longest longitudinal studies. Part 2, physical development, starts with conception when the male sperm fertilizes a female's egg. Let's see, this new one-cell entity contains 23 pairs of chromosomes, and each of those chromosomes contains lots and lots of genes. The first stage of development is the germinal stage, and that's just within the first 2 weeks. Think you are teeny tiny, the size of a germ, so germinal stage. And at that point, until you are made up of more than 100 cells, you're called a zygote. During this time, the placenta starts to form. The placenta is pictured here, but it's a mass of cells that line the uterus, and it serves as sort of a filter. It allows oxygen and nutrients to pass from mom to the fetus, and it also allows wastes to exit. The next stage is the embryonic stage from 2 weeks to 2 months. So the baby is known as an embryo at that point. This stage is important because it's when your organs and vital systems are developing. If things are not developing well, this is the stage where, what's the word? I can't even think of the word right now. Happen, where the baby stops continuing to develop, miscarriages. Then the fetal stage is from 8 weeks to birth. At this point, we call it a fetus. At 4 months, the fetal movement starts to be strong enough that the mom can feel it. So the baby reaches the age of viability around 24 weeks. So that's as early as 6 months. Age of viability means the age at which a baby could survive a premature birth. They may have developmental delays and have to spend a long time in the hospital, but 24 weeks is about where it is now. Let's see, other prenatal influences. We know that genetics, Down syndrome is a result of a genetic abnormality. Let's see, other things. Down syndrome occurs when there's a zygote that receives an extra chromosome at the moment of conception, and that causes intellectual disabilities, usually in the mild to moderate range. Teratogens, again, it can be things like drugs, but it could also be chemicals, exposure to chemicals, including pollution in the air. Viruses and that the mom contracts can also be considered teratogens. Drugs, alcohol, smoking, all of those are teratogens as well. We know that babies are born with reflexes, which are unlearned involuntary responses. The rooting reflex, if you touch a baby's cheek, they will turn their mouth towards it. That's to prepare them for nursing. Sucking reflex allows the baby to drink milk, to suck, and to breathe and swallow at the same time. The startle or moral reflex, if you startle a baby, they'll fling their arms and legs out. And the Babinski reflex, if you touch the bottom of a baby's foot, their toes fan out. And that one's a later indicator of neural developmental issues. And then the grasping reflex, if you touch the palm of their hand, they can grasp on tightly. Infant temperament, studies show that it is established very early on. By temperament, we mean how easy they are to adapt to situations, their overall mood and activity level, and emotional reactivity. 3 basic temperaments: easy, slow to warm up, difficult, and mixed. But studies show that they are stable over time. So an easy temperament baby tends to be an easygoing adult and teen later on. Maturation is how our brain's genetics, or how our brain causes our body to develop in the same sequence. So standing before walking, but maturation has to do with genetic sequence, and it sets the course of development. So motor development, the cephalocaudal trend says that we gain control of our head before our feet. So a baby can lift their neck and move their head around before they can start walking. Proximo-distal trend says they can control their center and then outward. So a baby can roll over, which controls a lot of center muscle control before they can move their arms and legs enough to crawl. Talking about some average ages, the big one you want to know is that walking on average happens right around 1 year old, same time for talking. The visual cliff experiment, in this one, babies crawled up to a glass drop-off, and they measured their heart rates to see if the baby's heart rates went up when they got to the drop-off or the visual cliff, and that would indicate whether or not they had depth perception. So Heart rates did go up. Older babies would stop crawling because they were able to see the depth, but younger babies, their heart rates went up, indicating that they could detect depth as well. So yes, young babies can detect depth, but they don't really know what to do with it until they've had experience crawling around the world. Moving on into older stages of physical development, puberty occurs earlier in females, and then males usually a couple years later. However, the growth spurts often are stronger in males, so girls may get taller first, but then the boys catch up and usually get taller. Other things that happen, primary sexual characteristics are the reproductive organs and the external genitalia. Secondary sex characteristics are anything that aren't part of the reproductive traits. So the deepening of the voice, the development of breasts and hips, pubic hair, and other kinds of hormonal changes. Other changes that happen during late adulthood, neural processing slows down, which makes it longer to process and to recall memories. Aging and intelligence, a lot of cognitive abilities decline, but their overall vocabulary and general knowledge increase. So it may be hard to form new memories and develop new skills, but overall knowledge still remains. As far as sensory abilities, by age 70, distance, hearing, perception, sense of smell all diminish, as well as muscle strength, reaction time, and stamina. And then by 80, neural processes slow down, especially for complex tasks. All right, part 4, getting into cognitive development across the lifespan. One of the names you do need to know for the exam is Jean Piaget for his work in cognitive development in children. He's one of the stage theorist supporters. So he said that children move from stage to stage. He said that our biological development happens amidst experiences, so the environment plays a big role in development. One of the terms Piaget established was schemas, the idea that we have mental molds or concepts. So for example, ball is something that rolls. Grandma is any older lady. Those are our basic schemas. And then as we come across new things in the world, when we blend things into an existing schema, that's assimilation. So for example, you come across a zebra, that fits your schema for a horse. Accommodation is after having more time with that schema, it becomes more detailed, and then you adapt it to form new information. So eventually you'd form a separate schema for zebras that they are like horses, but they have stripes. Other stages of cognitive development, so the sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages. Piaget said that during the sensory motor stage, the kid explores the world with their senses. Big thing that happens in this stage is object permanence. Once a kid reaches that stage, they know that something continues to exist even if they can't see it. So early on, peekaboo is exciting because when something is hidden in front of their face, they think it disappears completely and then it comes back. Sensory motor stage is from 0 to 2 years old. They also like to put lots of things in their mouth. Again, they're exploring the world through their senses. The pre-operational stage, the primary symptom at this or characteristic of this stage is that children are egocentric. We don't mean that they are selfish. We mean that they cannot perceive things from another point of view. We watched that video with the little boy in the volcano and he could not see the lady's point of view, only his own. So that's from about 2 to 7 years old. Excuse me. Another thing that happens during the pre-operational stage is they lack conservation. So they don't know that a quantity can keep its shape or keep its total amount, even when other properties like the shape change. So that's why when they pour the liquid into the smaller glass or a bigger glass, they don't realize that the amount stays the same. They have not grasped conservation. Other forms of conservation include number, so just moving those coins apart, they wouldn't understand that it's the same quantity. Matter, that if they reshaped a ball of clay, they wouldn't understand that that's the same amount of clay. And even just length, like moving these, it would be difficult for them until they reach the operational stage. Theory of mind is when they are starting to understand that other people can have their own beliefs. We viewed the example where the kids looked at the crayons and candles in the crayon box and the Snoopy doll. But they do not understand yet, until they've reached theory of mind, that other people can think different things than what they think. All right, the next stage is concrete operational stage from 7 to 12 years old. By this stage, so this is elementary school, children now start to master the idea of conservation, and they're no longer egocentric, which is important when they're trying to do things like math subtraction. But they understand reversibility. The final stage is the formal operational stage. That's abstract reasoning. Piaget said not everyone fully masters this stage, but they start to understand that things can happen hypothetically, even if they don't fully make sense. Our next one is section 5, communication and language development. Language is how we transmit our culture. It includes spoken, written, and gestured language, so like sign language. The first stage is the babbling stage, at which babies are just making sounds. Then the one-word stage, which happens right around 1 year old. They start to speak in one-word phrases. The two-word stage, happens right around 2 years old, and they speak in what we call telegraphic speech. So they use very short phrases, and they cut out other longer words. So go car means I would like to go for a ride in the car. And then after 2 years old, longer phrases. They're basically talking. Fast mapping is the idea that children learn language very quickly, so sometimes they learn words after only one exposure. Overextension is when they incorrectly use a word to describe a wider set of objects. So they might say ball, but that applies to a bouncy ball, but oranges, an apple, a small bouncy ball, a big bouncy ball, anything similar. That's called an overextension. In underextension, they're incorrectly using that for a narrow set of objects. So they say they want their doll. They don't mean any stuffed animal. They mean a very specific favorite doll. Overregularization, also called overgeneralization, is when they're over-applying regular grammar rules to all situations, like saying I goed to the store instead of I went to the store. This is a positive error because it means they're picking up on the rules of grammar. The vocabulary spurt shows us that it may not be the same time for all children to start speaking, but once they do, there's that dramatic increase in language. But for most children, that happens before 2 years old. Some different theories on language development. The operant learning theory based off Skinner, which we know Skinner was a behaviorist. He said that children develop a lot through imitation, association, and reinforcement. So really encouraging children to like repeat words, rewarding them, and cheering for them when they say words. Noam Chomsky, he had the nativist view. He said that an inborn universal grammar, that there's no way we can be rewarding kids for all the words they say, so they must have this inborn ability to learn language. He called it a language acquisition device, which is not an actual brain part, but it's the idea that the brain does have an inborn ability to pick up on language. The other theory, the social interactionist theory, and I don't know if we actually have a person that associates with that, but it's the idea that it's both, that we're learning language innately, but through the interaction with our environment, it also continues to grow. Lev Vygotsky is one of the names that you have to know, and his is also an interactionist theory. So he has the social learning theory and the zone of proximal development, which is the idea that children are capable of doing some things without help. But just beyond that is the zone of proximal development, which is what they can do with some help. But if you push a child beyond what they're developmentally ready to do, it can cause stress, failure, low self-esteem, and affect their ability to learn in the future. So we have the behaviorist, the nativist, and the interactionist theory with Lev Vygotsky. We know that there's a critical period when it comes to learning. Children who are never exposed to language by about age 7 gradually lose their ability to master any language. And the reason for that is called synaptic pruning, that our brain does go through and remove old unused neural connections, including language development. So if they don't use it, they lose that ability. The case of Jeannie was the case study we watched about the little girl who had been neglected for a really long time, and then she couldn't learn language. The biopsychosocial model is a really good explanation for how language develops, that we have the genetic components, our biological components in our brain, and then the socio-cultural things from being spoken to. Again, here's that critical period. They've got to learn language by about 7 years old. A reminder of different parts of the brain involved in language development. It's all on the left side. We've got Broca's area for speech production, controls the muscles in the left frontal lobe. Wernicke's area area in the left temporal lobe is where we hear the words and understand them. The motor cortex, which is at the back of the frontal lobe, helps us to move muscles. And we haven't really talked about angular gyrus, but the visual cortex also helps to see the written words. Some components or properties of language that basically makes language language. So for something to be considered a language, it has to be symbolic, that we have spoken sounds, but we also have written words to represent the objects. Those symbols are semantic, which means they actually have meaning. They are generative, that's a bigger one, that we can create more words, an infinite number of words and messages from our limited number of symbols, and that our language is structured, that we follow grammatical rules. Within language, the phonemes are the smallest units of speech. We'll look at a couple examples of those here in a minute. Morphemes are the smallest unit of meaning. Semantics is the meaning of words, and then syntax are the rules for arranging them, like grammar. So for example, the phonemes of the word goal has 3, g, o, l, 3 sounds. Morpheme for the word player, it has 2 morphemes, play, and then by adding the er, that changes the meaning. Semantics are the word's meaning, and then syntax is the grammar. And that's it for Unit 3 on development.